Hi everyone, so I'm going to be talking about how to scan IPv6. So to give you a brief kind of overview of what we did in this paper before going into all the details, we built a system called 6Sense, and it's an IPv6 internet-wide scanning system, and we used it to employ security analysis across the internet. So why should you, as a security audience, care about IPv6 and IPv6 security? Well, v6 has been around for a while, but it's only recently really having a major increase in adoption. So there's many different organizations using it, from the US government to hosting providers like AWS, to mobile providers like Vodafone, others, and to world governments. So it's very, very important that we have a good understanding of what security looks like in v6, and especially how it's different from prior v4. A really important security tool that we use for this kind of analysis and measurement is internet-wide scanning. Internet-wide scanning involves connecting to every device open on the internet on a certain protocol. So the state of the art for this is ZMAP, which can brute force connect to the entire IPv4 internet in just an hour. So that has made a lot of different interesting security analysis possible, and some of which has appeared in USENIX as well. And that includes things from vulnerability detection to IoT botnet tracking and measurement, all the way to tracking internet outages and measuring the impact of natural disasters. So this is all very important security analysis. Unfortunately, it's all been very IPv4 centric up until now. So what we set out to do in this paper is start to apply some of the security analysis to v6. In order to do that, the first thing we had to understand was, why is all of this IPv4 centric? Well, unfortunately, in IPv6, there's this problem of the number of addresses. There's 2 to the 128 possible IPv6 addresses. For context, using the vanilla ZMAP approach, brute force scanning approach, with a similar speed of 1 gigabyte per second, one scanner would take 53 billion trillion years to scan IPv6. So that's just intractable. Now, you could parallelize, and for 2 scanners, you're up at 26 billion trillion years, so that's a little better, but still impossible. Now, with 47 trillion scanners, it's only going to take an hour. So that's pretty good. One tiny little problem now, and that's that in order to build 47 trillion scanners, you're going to have to dismantle over 4,000 different solar systems for raw materials. So unfortunately, we did not have the resources to dismantle 4,000 different solar systems for this paper. So was that it? Could we just do nothing else? Well, I do have some good news, though. It turns out there are not actually 2 to the 128 different devices. There are far, 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 far fewer. And what we want to do when we're doing internet-wide scanning is find the devices on the internet, because those are the things that we can do interesting analysis on. So what we can do is actually guess which addresses correspond to devices on IPv6. And we can do that using domain knowledge like RFCs and common patterns. And we can also do that using known IP addresses from UDP, DNS lookups, trace routes, those sorts of sources. So that's what we did when we, that's what we did when we built 6Sense. So 6Sense, unlike a system like ZMAP, which can just have the scanner component, 6Sense requires a number of different components. It has this generator, that's kind of the core part of 6Sense, that does this guessing. And the generator takes in these seed addresses from UDP, trace routes, and it guesses those possible new addresses. It sends them to this dealiaser component, which I'm going to talk about why we need dealiaser, what it is in a little bit, but it's an important part of an IPv6 scanning system. The generated addresses go to the scanner that scans the internet for them, and then those active responsive addresses get sent back to the generator. And the generator is dynamic, so it updates over time towards regions where we're more likely to find interesting active addresses. But the question is, how do we actually do this generation? IPv6 is big. How do we hone down to the regions that we want to look at? Well, it turns out IPv6 does have some structure to it. So typically, IPv6 addresses are split into 3 parts. There's the first quarter to a half of the address is the allocation. And an allocation, there's a fixed number of these, and they typically represent an organization's address space. And so we know what those are. We have that fixed number. We can get them from Whois records. We can get them from public data sources. The remainder, the entirety of the first half of the address is the upper 64 bits, and that typically, every individual device typically has its own unique upper 64 bits on the IPv6 internet. Finally, the second half of the address is the lower 64 bits, and this uses a number of different assignment patterns, but often we know what they are, they're common, and they can range from all zeros and a one to variable low bit patterns to encoding MAC addresses with FFFE in the middle. So what we realized was that we could generate each section of the address on its own. And we could do that using a generator that leverages the structure of that portion of the address. So for allocations, we could use a reinforcement learning approach to sample all of the allocations and then hone down to the ones where we're more likely to find active addresses, where we're more likely to be able to discover these devices. For the upper 64s, we can use a deep learning approach in an LSTM to learn what is the structure of these upper 64s from the prior seed addresses and also how those correlate to different allocations. And then this LSTM can take in an allocation and generate the rest of the upper 64. For the lower 64, we can generate these lower 64s based on known common patterns that we've observed in the seed addresses. And so with that, we can generate these full addresses. But now that we have those addresses, I want to talk to you for a moment about this de-aliaser component. So aliasing is a significant concern in IPv6 and IPv6 scanning. And alias occurs when a single device or a handful of devices respond to all of the addresses on a certain prefix. And so what that can do is it can bias generators that are more dynamic and then adapt over time into thinking that they're finding a lot of different active new devices when it's actually the same device. And so we need this de-aliaser component to filter out those alias regions when we're doing this sort of dynamic scanning. And I don't have time to talk about how we did that today, but I refer you to the paper for more details about that. So finally, we send the addresses to this de-aliaser, go to the scanner, they're scanned on the internet, and then those active responsive addresses are used to dynamically update the generator. So now we have this system. We can fully generate all of these addresses. We can scan them, but are we actually finding anything interesting? Well, to test that out, we ran we used 6Sense to generate 100 million IP addresses across 4 different ports and protocols: ICMP, TCP/80, TCP/443, and UDP/53. And we chose these ports and protocols because they're common and because they have interesting security applications. We found over 11.8 million active addresses across these 4 ports and protocols. And for ICMP, this was an 11% hit rate. So that's pretty good. We can find things. But can we find interesting things? Well, to test that out, recall what I told you earlier about those upper 64 bits, how every unique device on the internet typically has a unique upper 64 bits. Well, we looked at how many new active upper 64 bits we found. We found over 6 million. So that means that we're probably finding we're finding new things on the internet as well. So that seems good. But we're a security conference. And really, what we're all interested in is what are the security applications of this. So we did a couple of different security applications, and I'm going to talk to you about one here today, but I refer to the paper for others. We looked at the TCP/443 active addresses. So remember those 1.1 million TCP/443 active addresses from the table before. We connected to them via TLS. We got the certificates. We got the banner information. And we found over 100,000 certificates across these TCP/443 active addresses that had never before been seen in IPv6. And we correlated those with census and census data on v4. Oh, I'm sorry, never before been seen on IPv4. And we correlated those with the census data on that. But we wanted to go just a little bit further, and we wanted to understand what's the security implication of this. And so we went and we classified what those device types actually were, and we found over 80,000 security-sensitive devices exposed on the internet. And these included things like this HP OfficeShip Pro 8600, which, well, a printer in and of itself is not necessarily something to write home about when it's exposed on the internet. This example is illustrative because I want to point your attention to the IPv4 address here, which is within a NAT. And that's illustrative of the fact that what we've observed across the IPv6 internet is all of these devices that are behind NATs on v4, but now are just publicly exposed on the internet, and we're just relying on NATs for security on v4. Also found things like this, like hypervisors like this VMware ESXi, routers like the Cisco router, wireless repeaters like this Fritzbox 1200, and next generation firewalls like this Hillstone Networks firewall. We want to go just one step further and understand what is the security implications of these devices being exposed. And so we classified what were the CVEs on these device types. Now, we did not, for ethical reasons, actually attempt to exploit them, and we informed all of the relevant ISPs about that we'd found these. So we found at least 70 relevant CVEs. This was bad from a security perspective. You might recall that Fritzbox wireless repeater and our HP OfficeJet Pro 8600, which also, coincidentally, doesn't have any password protections. If you take away nothing else from this talk, what I hope you take away from it is that it's very, very important that we do this sort of security analysis on IPv6 and that we have an understanding of IPv6 security. We can now actually scan IPv6. We can find these addresses and devices. And everything so far is pointing towards there being significant security vulnerabilities and this prior reliance on NATs in IPv4 that you no longer have in IPv6. And this warrants significant additional work here on the security of v6 and the security of these devices. To help future researchers in that, we've open sourced 6Sense. You can find it here. The link is also in the paper. Thank you so much, and I'll take any questions.